Welcome to Culture Couch Live this week. We've got Chris, Mark, and Merv. It's Merv or Murph?
Merv, you can call me Merv. I haven't got my moustache on.
We should tell that story sometime again.
I haven't got my moustache on today, but I will wear
Jared. I'll call you Jared so people don't think your name's Merv. Merv, not Merv. Well, welcome, gents. Good to see you all. Hey, we'll go straight into it. Well, I had an interesting conversation with a mate of mine the other day. I used to play footy with him years and years ago. He now runs a company. And they brought someone in to change the culture because the metrics were telling them one particular area of their business was down. So they brought a gentleman in to change the culture. And it was fairly, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the type of company, but it was a company you could actually measure, how long it took to do X or Y or whatever. So clearly the numbers showed it was down. Bring someone in. A month in, the guy's going, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with, good guys. Everyone's working hard, et cetera, et cetera. And it just led me to think about how hard it is. We talk about it. The newest person wants to fit into the culture, isn't it? It's really hard and we had a really long discussion around what he could do in order to try and fix something they knew was broken. But this person's come in and all they've done is fit in. Oh, good group of people. I'll do this, I'll do that sort of thing. So I thought that was a really interesting topic, Murph, and I will start with you because we do talk about, isn't it? The newest person, regardless of what they do, tends to fit in. It becomes really difficult to challenge, even when you know it's wrong, or even when you know it's broken or not working, or we're behind schedule or whatever it might look like. It is difficult to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. There's a couple of things there, I think. The first one is, when someone comes to an organization for the first time, they want to fit in. So they look around and they go, what's acceptable here or not? And people often talk about the little things, but we call them the important things because they're the things that give you your culture. They make you who you are. And that's sort of like, what time do meetings start? What do you wear? Are you respectful or is there incivility? So all those little things, they're not little, they're really important. So I think that's vital, that we understand what are those things that make us who we are. Are they things that we want? So I think that's really important. And probably the second point, I'd just building on what you said there, Ruzi, is there's been a couple of really interesting reports come out recently. And one of them is the RoboDebt report, where there was a whole lot of people that knew what was going on in the government departments and politicians as well, but they didn't speak up. So it goes to what you're saying, is that what stops people speaking up when they clearly know that something is wrong? And it's that systemized culture of no, I'm not going to say anything, which allows bad things to happen. And it drives us crazy because we work in this space of set clear values and behaviors, build good relationships, create a psychological safe environment where people can feel safe to speak up. And yet we have these systems where people, like 500,000 people were affected by a program which most people knew was wrong, but no one was prepared to stand up and say, hey, I think we need to stop this. And it is it's almost beyond my comprehension. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, on that, Mark, too, isn't it? We walk past it once. It's really difficult to then pull it back. It's funny. I always think of the analogy about if you get someone's name wrong and I call Merv, there's a point of no return. Like I actually can't then go back on it, and you can't come back to me and go, oh, Brucey, it's not Merv, it's actually Murph, or Jared, you can call me Jared, isn't it? It sort of creeps up on you. There's a point of no return, Mark, isn't there, where we all start to walk past the behavior, and then it just becomes normal as to what we do.
It's a good point. And just picking up on something that Jez or Merv actually mentioned before, we talk about systemizing activities or what we do in the workplace for healthy cultures. I think on the flip side to that is once you start to unfortunately systemized and unhealthy culture, it becomes very, very hard to break. And they're one and the same, if you like. They're just very different behaviors. And I think, again, picking up on something that Merv said, is the being very clear on the behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable within an organization. And I don't think many organizations do that well. Everyone's got a great purpose, values, mission, vision, all that really high level strategic stuff. But when you actually start to look at the behavioral level, are we as a company really clear about what's unacceptable and acceptable? And I think if you start to really implement that, then that could be a big opportunity to change. But you're right, we naturally want to fit in. As humans, we've done it for tens of thousands of years. We've fit into tribes, and that's probably not going to change. So we really need to set up the healthy systems.
And you guys have heard me talk about this, Murph, more than anyone, but I would never coach without bringing an external consultant in. And this is another reason for it, because it's very hard internally to challenge something, or even sometimes to think, there's the black and whites we know are right and wrong, but there's things that we're not absolutely sure. And we just go along as we're talking about. But all of a sudden, an external consultant comes in and they've got no emotional attachment to the business. They've got no emotional connection to the CEO or the head of HR, people and culture. What they do is they provide you with a really, really important set of eyes, Chris, to go, that's wrong. What you're doing is not right. Here's our culture code. This is what you stand for. Honesty is one of your values or whatever. That's not honest. And I'll go to McGrave saying that, the value of bringing someone externally in can never be underrated from that point of view, because they will challenge you. And I think that's why sometimes it scares people, because people in leadership positions don't necessarily want to be challenged, Chris.
Well, it's funny you say that, because this came up with a client yesterday where he's wanting the easy button for all these values and behaviors that we've laid out in their culture code to take seat in the company. And the analogy I made it to him was it's the hoarder who walks by the piles of boxes and newspapers and doesn't see a problem until somebody comes in the house and says, why are you living like that? Right. And then they're like, oh, wow, I am living like that. And it's that kind of creeping crawl of a gray area without really well-defined values and behaviors allow those things to creep in. And all of a sudden, everybody amongst the group feels perfectly comfortable with the gray area until the fresh eyes walk in and say, wait a minute, let's actually look at this for a second. Is this really what you stand for? And I think that's in large part why these things happen. And then people in leadership positions realize their folly for it and then make threatening comments. Hey, don't say anything about that. It's better to get along and go along, right? So I think this is a great conversation, because we start seeing more and more of this creep into society. It certainly happens in business.
But your point's great, Chris, is that then the person that actually speaks up and says, hey, I don't think this is right, suddenly they can become persecuted. And we see this with, like, we're talking systematic institutional wrongdoing, but it's exactly the same in a company, and it may not be quite as severe. So you've got least intrusive to most intrusive, if you like. But the problem is the person that speaks up is often the person that gets whacked. And we actually should embrace them and say, hey, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We're gonna sort this out. But instead, it's easier just to push them aside and try and cover everything up and hope like hell that we don't get caught. Or I don't know what people think when how the fuck do they think they're going to get away with it?
But I also think, if you touched on it too, often it starts with those least intrusive things, doesn't it? Like it's that little things you touched on before. They're not little things. They might appear at the initial stage, Mark, to be, I was 5 minutes late for that meeting, or I was 2 minutes late, or I didn't ring him back when I said I was going to ring him back. But I wonder how the end result, which is catastrophic in some of these instances we're now seeing, starts with that so-called little thing. And I would bet most of the time it starts with someone walking past, a smaller type behavior. But to Chris's point, Mark, we haven't embedded, and you said it before, we haven't embedded our culture code. We haven't systemized what we think is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
We also know that it comes back to when we were a kid. If you get away with something, you'll continue to do it until you don't get away with it. And that's
Right.
exactly the same as we're talking about here. Unless someone says something, you will continue to do it, whether you know it's right or wrong. And then suddenly, now this is probably a deeper conversation, your moral compass might even start to change, and you convince yourself that these things are acceptable. And that's when you start getting into a world of, where we are now. But something I just wanted to add to that was the person who often speaks up is not the leader. And that's where I think they become persecuted, because they are part of the team. I think if somehow organizations can have leaders to speak up, then it completely changes. And I just reminded me, and this is a very sort of smaller scale, but I remember playing, state level junior cricket, and our captain, there was a parent who was making all sorts of comments from the sideline. Our captain actually walked up and said to him, "Hey mate, you need to keep it down. There's actually kids around here." Gave him a little, as we say in Australia, gave him a clip. But that set the tone for the rest of the team to go, whoa, geez, the captain's actually sticking up for us as a team, but he's also willing to go to an adult and say, hey, that's unacceptable behaviour around this cricket because there's kids around it. It just had me thinking. I was like, geez, if it could have the ability for leaders to speak up, it could potentially change it. But unfortunately, as we're talking about, it's often not the leader who speaks up, and it's somebody else.
But the leaders are complicit in it, Mark. That is the problem.
I agree. Totally.
So in order for this behaviour to continue, the leader either doesn't know what's happening, and therefore they're not a leader, they should get the hell out of there, or they are complicit in it and are allowing it to continue for whatever reason, and they should get the hell out of there again, and if they're not prepared to deal with it. And so that's why it's so hard to speak up, isn't it? Because the people at the top are doing it. And it goes to your point, Ruzi. Sometimes I think that's why people don't want external consultants in, because they don't want to hear what they've got to say. Like, why bring someone in to tell us our behaviour is disrespectful if we're not going to change it? So it's far easier just to say, oh no, it's too expensive. We don't want to do that. Like, the last thing we need is you coming in here to tell us what we already know and know that it's wrong. Like, it's fascinating.
And let's flip the narrative for a minute, Chris, because if we allow and celebrate that person to speak up, things change really quickly, really dramatically. That's the other point to it. If you want a really good culture, you want a good workplace, and we know now, culture, productivity is better, mental health is better. So that's a given. If we talk about a really good culture against a really poor culture, there's so many benefits. We have to start celebrating that person, Chris, don't we? We have to start to listen to that person, because if we do, it makes significant dramatic change for everyone within the organization.
Yeah. I mean, even looking at Mark's example a minute ago, when you think of that phrase, cometh the moment, cometh the champion, that moment, that was the most inspirational thing that would have happened on that cricket pitch that day, was having him do that, right? That's the sign of a real leader. And we ought to celebrate those things, not denigrate them. And to me, in those moments when people step up, when others stand back, that's the most inspirational thing we can do in our lives. And I think, when we look at these things that are happening in the public space, and you think that, you know what, there is no culture code there. And certainly there wouldn't be a culture code.
There is a culture code, Chris. It's just because that's one thing I love, is that every group has a culture. Like, whether you like it or not, it's either fantastic, not so good, or somewhere in the middle. But we've all got every family has a culture. Every group of people, and so. Yeah,
it's probably more succinct to say that that's an example of a culture left to chance.
Yes.
Culture by design, right?
100%.
So just to wrap it up, as I normally do, what's one, if someone's sitting out there going, they're in this messy situation, and we've discussed it a bit, but Murph, and I'll go around all three of you. What's one thing that they can really do, tomorrow, starting from tomorrow? What's the one thing you would recommend them do?
Yeah, it's what's one thing? I think the difficulty with this one is does the leader know, or are they complicit? So let's say that there is something going on in the organisation, and it's going on, and as the leader, how do you? My advice would be just stop. I know it's not great, and I know it's on your watch or it's on our watch, but let's just stop and not allow it to continue. And it may be embarrassing.
Yep.
And it may create shame, but the truth about it is, if we are vulnerable enough to stop and listen to people when they come to us and say, I don't think this is right, we need to deal with it. If we have that capacity to stop, listen, be vulnerable, and then try and find a way through it, not just let it keep going, because I think it unravels eventually. And you know, there's one of the big four in Australia is currently, you know, people knew that was going on, but again, no one stopped it. So as a leader, be prepared to admit to yourself, this isn't right. I need to fix it. I'm going to stop this right now. And it will be really hard, but don't just let it keep going is probably what I would say.
Yep. Chris, for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's hard to give advice. But I look at things through a certain prism, and that prism to me in those moments is to, in whatever scenario it is that my kids would have full visibility to what's going on. Now what would you do?
Yeah.
And to me, that it's kind of how I've made those difficult decisions in my life of what I need to do.
Yeah,
and so
100%.
that's how I kind of frame that.
Values-based decision making, mate. Very nice.
Yeah, that's good. Mark?
I'll probably go one step back further and think, just be honest to yourself. Actually have a think about, because often, as we've said, we become so ingrained in bad behavior that we're probably not honest to ourselves that this is unacceptable. So bit like Jez, you know, take the time, have a think about what you're actually doing, and is there something that you need to stop doing, and be honest to yourself.
Yeah. And for me, I think probably a little bit similar to what you're saying, Chris, is what's your personal brand? You know, I see so many people not live their doctrine because, you know, I mean, we understand why. Sometimes I need a paycheck, I need to put a roof over my head, or my kids, I need to send them to private schools or whatever. But live your doctrine. You know, you can't have a personal value set of honest, supportive, and innovative if you're telling lies and you're not helping your teammates. It just doesn't work like that. So always go back to your personal values, and it's a really good way to sort of hopefully keep you on track. But yeah, look,
Sorry,
really,
Rich, I was just gonna say that the other thing I would say, and this is what you're always strong on, is get someone external in and just listen to them.
Yeah.
And you may not like what they're telling you, but just listen. Because again, so often we'll go into organizations and they don't want to hear what you're saying. So we all wander off fat, dumb, and happy, and you know, and nothing changes. But the truth is, you've provided the opportunity or the platform or the catalyst for that change to occur, and the leader hasn't taken it. So alternatively, people take it as well. So yeah.
100%. I would say that's a given. Absolutely. Get someone externally in. And sometimes external people say you're actually doing things better than you think you are. So there's that part of it as well. It's not always the negative. I mean, how many times have we been in a workshop and our initial IPAs are we're not good at this, and we get in the work. You guys are fantastic. You have really good conversations. You know, you're really honest with each other, and they go, oh, okay. So it works both ways. This is not just, but the external set of lens, that's a given for me. Outstanding Culture Couch. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Murph. And we'll see you all next week on the Culture Couch Live. Thanks a lot, everyone.